I love how you're recounting the story as if I was not involved directly. It's not I was like, Brian, I was there.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just kidding. It was just fun.
Previously on the
Previously on the study.
It just looks like an episode of the Kardashians. It's just all this weird petty drama.
I'm going to get a bigger ass. Isn't that what they say? I don't know. I've never watched the
something like
Kardashians.
that. Neither have I. It's always been
Never.
like I've been like hearing it from another room or something. I'm just like I'm not getting
I always hear it after the fact, like through other sources, and like, but yes, I try to stay away from the Kardashians.
You can like smell the stupidity in the air when it's on. I can't deal with that.
It's just not my thing. It's not my thing. It's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. I will say no more.
Fair deal. So what's new with you? What's exciting?
Well, sorry.
Eating. Did I get you while you're eating?
Yep. I didn't know you were going to ask me anything. Nothing too much other than I found edible cookie dough.
That's not where I thought I was going when I heard edible.
Mm-hmm. I found people that you can eat. No. No.
Edible cookie dough, you say? Interesting.
Yeah. No. I gotta say, it's pretty decent. You can bake them too if you want.
Ooh.
But it's ready to eat. No eggs involved.
I guess if you also too, like if you're making your own ice cream, that'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm thinking. But I don't have any ice cream, and I just wanted something sweet.
I remember back in the day we had an ice cream maker, and like it would make like just like one of those little tiny tubs, like the little ones that you like single serving and then you're done kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it would make one of those at a time, but like you can make whatever you wanted in it. So we tried like weird stuff with it. Some more failure-y than other.
Do you ever remember, I swear this was a thing. It was like almost like a Frosty, right?
Okay.
Like a frozen milkshake that you would get in the freezer section at the grocery store. And I swear Milky Way made it. Or like that, it was like, or something like that. Maybe not. But as I recall, do you recall anything like that?
Sounds familiar. I know Oreo did one.
I know I'm not giving you much to go on here.
No, that's fair, but still, I'm like...
You're just like, all right.
It wasn't like a Klondike
or something. You're giving me nothing to go on. No, it wasn't a Klondike. You used a spoon to eat it. And it was the closest thing I could compare it to was like a Frosty, but frozen. Like it was more frozen than a Frosty because it was sitting in the freezer. If you take like a Frosty, fresh one, and then you put it in the freezer for later, you know how like it doesn't come out quite the same. It's kind of like a little bit more iced over, a little bit almost like slushy like in the texture of it.
Yeah, I personally can't say it's ringing a bell. It doesn't mean I'm not saying it didn't exist.
No. Say what you're thinking. You think I'm crazy, don't you?
Well, I think that in general, but it's not because of this.
No, this is the least. This is the least thing. Like you thinking about some frozen milkshake from 30 years ago? No, that's mild.
I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, so what do we got? What do we got on the docket today here, sir? Good sir.
Today, I have radio play.
Hey.
Going back to, I think these first started appearing with the start of the radio. Because when the radio launched, there was no TV. So the radio was kind of like the first in-home entertainment source with the advent of electricity.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of kids shows I know started at the start. There was like a lot of westerns and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I remember in Christmas Story, didn't they have like a little bit about him?
Yeah, Little Orphan Annie. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So a lot of that kind of stuff at the start. But as things went on, it kind of took a downturn with the advent of television and television really taking over the home. But then as the digital age took over, podcasts were around.
Yeah.
And as soon as podcasts were in play, they started creeping into that space. And then before you know it, you have chapter by chapter digital downloads of radio plays. And it was a really smart thing for that platform. And I think that they've been around for a few years. So there's a growing library of stuff out there that's pretty cool.
No, I'd say so. I can remember you were talking about when radio was kind of the first big multimedia technology, especially in the early 20th century. I can remember my grandmother. That was their cell phone, their social media at the time, if you want to. I'm trying to compare it to the more modern version. I mean, radio is still a big thing.
Especially on satellite, yeah.
Yeah, but I can remember that was how they got their news. She would tell me the stories of like during the war, how FDR would have his like fireside chats and they would keep the update. I've always thought too, like if you had the ability now, like everything, it's like 24/7 live stream. You can like literally, you can just see everything going on. I don't know how would that have played out in World War II if you had the technology that we do today. I shudder to think of that, but it's strange to know if like you had the ability to literally pinpoint where like the front line is and where everybody is at the same time. I guess there could be some benefit to that, but I'm digressing. I'm going off topic. But yes, I can remember her saying the radio was like that. That was the main thing, to the point where she would always fall asleep with it under her pillow. She had like a little, one of those little like battery powered radios, handheld, that you could have. She stuck it under the pillow and just listened to it and fell asleep. Much like how I'll fall asleep.
She had it on an iPod Nano, and then she just put the iPod Nano under her pillow.
I just think it's funny because like now most of it, I'll fall asleep with my phone on. That's where I get the information from. So it's
not it's not that unlike what it was. So it's kind of all come full circle. It's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, in terms of like what we have today, I mean, there's some really interesting ones out there that I personally have become really attached to quite a few of them. And as a storytelling form, I think it's an interesting one because you can kind of multitask with it, whereas you can't. Like with a TV show or a movie, you kind of have to focus on it unless it's something you've seen before. But typically, if I'm putting something on, I want to watch it. I don't want to ignore it. And with podcasts, you can kind of just stick it in your ear and get a few other things done, or while you're writing or doing whatever. It's like that's what I kind of like about them is you can kind of do more than one thing with them. I can get a lot more of them done.
Yeah, there is a much more meditative quality to them. I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about this off air a few times, but like, what are some of the ones that you've come across that have really struck you, if any?
In terms of like currently?
Yeah, like any ones that are out there or something, anything that you picked up, even retroactively, even going back to like Orson Welles and War of the Worlds.
Well, that one too. Like that's one of the first one that comes to my mind. The famous Orson Welles War of the World broadcast that he did, the reciting of it. And I can remember like people like I guess there were people that freaked out when it happened because they took it as real, but I don't know if it got as bad as like it's the legend of it has become.
Yeah, I think it was a crisis of marketing because like it just kind of happened and they didn't really preempt people for that at all.
Well, this isn't so much a narrative one, but I guess it is in the sense more of a character driven. Have you seen, I don't know if it's still, I haven't listened to it in a bit. Let me just double check here, but have you seen the podcast, the Ron Burgundy podcast?
I actually have not. I was unaware this was a thing.
Yeah, no, let me make sure here. Yeah, the Ron Burgundy podcast. Yep, I think it's still going.
Is like actually with Will Ferrell, or is
and he interviews the guests, but as Ron Burgundy, as that character. So I do like that a lot.
I was completely unaware of that. I'm gonna have to check that one out.
You're the king of podcasts.
I know that one's completely slipped by my radar. I think I might have heard that in passing, but I completely forgot that was a thing.
Yeah, hold on here. I'm checking to see. Am I not? What am I doing wrong here? What is this? What is wrong with me?
I don't know.
Well, there's 5 seasons at least.
Okay.
I'm trying to see if they're still doing them or if it.
Did they list what the length of their seasons are?
It looks like about. Let's see. That's 8 episodes. Let me check season 4. Yeah, it goes about 8 episodes. So it could be. I cannot confirm if it's still going, but it is definitely one that I enjoyed when I came across it few years back, listened to it. I liked just one because I love Anchorman.
Oh my gosh, yeah. One of the most quotable movies of all time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we quote, that's one of the ones I say we quote. That's up there. We quote that one a lot.
Regularly, for sure.
It's become involuntary now at this point.
It's literally ingrained in my vernacular at this point.
Yep. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. I trying to think of some of my cardinal few that I've really enjoyed, specifically that are radio plays. Like I have a lot of podcasts that I like that are not necessarily narrative, like a lot that are based on storytelling, but some of like the ones that are like strictly like narratives, like they're meant to play out like an audio radio play. I think my personal favorite that I've heard is K63. It is a Spotify original.
Okay.
You probably heard this story, actually. I think you and I talked about this at one time, but it's based on, like, the core of what that story is based off of an actual real event that happened. But like it's obviously like very, very embellished into like the hypothetical possibility of what this guy said was true. But the real story of it is this guy was picked up naked running through town, and he was picked up for public indecency, and they got him in. He was eventually put with a therapist, and his official statement read that he was a time traveler from the future, and he started listing out events, and a lot of which correlated to things that were happening, and it was getting to be, oh, this guy might be telling the truth. So it was obviously never confirmed or denied, but it was a very interesting story. And then a few people picked it up and decided to run with it. Well, what if somebody's actually telling the truth.
Yeah.
Was kind of the idea. So the first season is really great. It kind of goes through and like pretty much follows strictly just like the case reports of like what happened, but then at the end of, obviously to avoid spoilers, I don't want to blow the series, but so if you do want to, I do encourage checking it out if you haven't, though. Maybe come back and give us a chance. But Oscar Isaacs is in it. It's Julianne Moore and Oscar Isaacs in the lead roles. Yeah, it's a Spotify original. It's actually funded by Spotify, something that they decided to produce themselves. It's a great little series, especially that I really like that first season. Just recently they dropped a second, and goes and spirals off into the whole chaos of time travel. And you know me, I love all things time travel, anything relating to time travel. So it was definitely an interesting dive, but great performances. And what I love most about it is they were very short episodes. They were just like quick in and out. And like each season is like so far has been like the equivalent of like a normal television episode. So
yeah,
it's kind of nice to just have something you can kind of burn through when you have the time and can pick it up and while you're multitasking or doing other things. So
what would you mention, like the length, the format? What have you found, like, because I'm not as familiar with radio plays as you are. Have you found what tends to be like that 30-minute one? Does that tend to be the sweet spot for doing a radio play narrative?
I think it really depends on the story, and that's why I think it's such a unique medium, especially now that it's like kind of getting its legs in podcasting. Seems to be where it's kind of getting its footing. What I like about it is that timestamp, that length is kind of just really dependent on what the story you're telling is, and it's like, if you're going to have one that's a bit longer, I think you need to justify it with a story that's worthy of it. But at the same time, I personally find the shorter ones to be better because you're getting to the point a little quicker, I think, is why I like them. But I have a few that I watch that are upwards of like 45 to an hour an episode. So one of the big ones that I really like is a show called Baraska, and it's
Baraska, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it into word. Like these are my own words of description for it, but it's kind of like if you took Stranger Things and then revisited those characters like in 20 years in a therapy session of them recounting those events. It's kind of like what Baraska is. But it's an interesting one. They're still going strong. They've been around for a couple, so they're a good one for sure. There's a show called Homecoming, which actually got adapted into a USA drama series by the same creative team that did Mr. Robot.
Oh, okay, all right.
Kind of like a surrealist, kind of corporate, interesting type thing. There was a lot of interesting wheels turning on that one. I never got around to. I only watched a few episodes of the TV series, but the fact that one got. That's the only one I can think of that kind of spun that way. I know there have been others, but none that I've followed directly. So that was kind of interesting. And then we were talking about, I think last week, about Until Dawn a little bit.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
A couple of the names that were involved in that were on a series called Blackout. That one I haven't followed through all the way so far. That's also a really interesting one. It's a kind of unique story. There's a lot of other ones out there. I know that Marvel even has their own full run of interconnected shows now. They did the Wastelanders comic series as, I think it's like 4 or 5 different podcasts that are interconnected by separate episodes.
Wow.
So it's kind of like it's Old Man, Star-Lord, and Rocket together in one of them. There's one strictly about Doctor Doom taking over the world. And then there's all kinds of stuff out there now. I mean, the forum has been kind of open-ended, especially since a few years back. Spotify and Apple open sourced their platforms to kind of let anybody come in to make content that they want. That's the whole reason that you and I are even on here talking right now.
No, that's true. Yes.
It's kind of interesting how this flood of content has happened, because if you have the gumption to go out there and produce something, it can be there.
No, and it's still what I love is the rules, not the rule, but the guidelines or the basic principles of storytelling are still there, even in just the audio form. I mean, you look at how big, like, just speaking of like audio stories, like how big audio books have become recently. I feel like that has exploded along with, and maybe that's an effect of like the podcast scene, but and the internet itself. But that has become huge lately, I've noticed.
Yeah, big time. I noticed a lot of local libraries have support on both Hoopla and Lily, and you can get audiobooks from that, like just from the library. If you have a library card, you can get reserved an audiobook. And if you don't have the time necessarily to always sit down and read a book, it's nice to be able to have that as an alternative option.
No, what's interesting, I think I like too, is, and you might have mentioned, is the accessibility for anyone to to do it and put it out there. So like I would say just how we're doing this podcast right now.
Yeah.
It in today's age, it's literally the one where all you just need to find is just to have, like you said, the gumption to see it through and write the story. And then I know, like me, I'm not the best actor in the world, but maybe you can someone who would like to act it out or do the readings for you as you record it. But there's very little in your way other than your own challenges, just you getting it done and putting it out there.
Yeah.
It was like, if you want to make a movie, even if you want to make a movie, great. You still got to get the camera, you got to get the script, you got to get the crew, shoot it.
The locations, which is an absolute, I'll have to share trying to get a location horror story one day. Okay.
But we'll save that because that one will take me a while.
Yeah.
Like writing a book, even if you want to write a book or craft poetry, you can do that. But then if you want to publish it, getting it out there can be a little bit difficult too. I mean, obviously with the ebook thing, but you still gotta go through all those hoops. I do think the narrative radio play, the narrative podcast, whatever term you want to use, is the most accessible one in terms of just what you have to get done to actually being able to put it out there for everyone to enjoy. I mean, correct. If you can think of something else, maybe I'm wrong here on this.
Well, part of what I've liked from what I've seen of radio plays actually being produced, because now I've seen like behind the curtains of a few of people I know that have made them, it's kind of like the atmosphere of a table read, and especially post-COVID, where we're all getting so accustomed to video screens and everything. It's as simple as just picking up a mic and then getting somebody on a video conference. You can really produce one of these things just by phone call, really, and obviously a little bit more in depth than that, but putting it into simple terms of like how it feels to actually sit down and get it done. There will be some sound design involved and some music production, but those things will come after, like the actual sitting down with your actors. It's like, it's not so much of a production that it feels insurmountable. It's like, it's a very attainable medium, which I kind of love about it.
Yeah. One, and you had mentioned before, one, I was trying to look up the name for it. One I had listened to fairly recently. Have you heard of Welcome to Night Vale?
No, that's one that's got by me. What's this?
No, yeah. It's fictional podcast. Again, I haven't kept up with some of them, but I do remember listening to a few episodes. It's definitely in that old school, like we mentioned, War of the Worlds, the famous Orson Welles one. It's definitely in that old school radio style, and it's set in the city, the town of Night Vale, where just like each episode, there can be like just really like weird things are going on, monsters. It can be a little bit of horror.
Yeah,
it has a little bit of an Evil Dead vibe sometimes to it, because you can get a little bit of humor in there. It's a unique one that I'd stumbled upon a little while back. I haven't kept up with the podcast and the narrative play, but that's one I would definitely recommend checking out.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. It's like, I like stuff that's like a different tone like that. And you referenced Evil Dead. I mean, Evil Dead is a very different kind of mix of making you laugh and scaring the hell out of you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, absolutely.
Anything that's a little bit different, I'm definitely on board.
Well, and two, with the radio play, one, I remember another one I found, I think it was just a kind of a limited series or a one-off if you want. I noticed a lot of people will do things like the Iliad or the Odyssey or Beowulf, which I think is great, but some of them will do it like straight out, just kind of the way it was. Others will take it and adapt it and kind of update it for a more modern audience, at which I love, because I think like, hey, if that gets people to get interested in these classic stories and getting people reading them again, or at least enjoying them again, I'm all for it.
Yeah. I even saw too, I was just looking this up recently in my research, YouTube, you can pull up all these recordings of like classic radio, just runs, just hours of radio off of like certain stations from the past. And then like, cause like a lot of them would like do reruns of a lot of the same shows. It's like you have access to this database of stuff from like decades and decades of all this storytelling and stuff. I'm like, I don't even know where to start with all that, because there's so much material like out there. So I mean, the wealth of stuff that's out there is just like, it's so awe-inspiring. Honestly.
No, it is. You mentioned like having all those radio plays and like that wealth of information. If I can remember correctly from science class, if I'm
going
totally,
back to science class,
if I'm totally wrong here, I apologize. I'm not wealthy enough to actually put tons of research to cut this out. Cut that out. No, but isn't it that like once a radio signal is sent, it'll just keep traveling throughout space? Am I?
Yeah, no, that's 1,000% true.
So yeah, because I think I remember this in Cosmos from Carl Sagan. Like every radio thing that we've ever sent over, whatever, is still traveling. That signal is still going, reverberating throughout space. Like, I think if you remember the movie Contact, one of the things that they get back from the signal ends up being like the Nuremberg rally from 1933 in Germany.
Well, yeah, because wasn't that one of like the first actual televised things?
Yeah,
that's
it was
why
like one
it's
of the
like
first
the first
televised things in history. So that's like one of the, of course, people like take it in a bad way, and which is understandable. Characters in the movie, but that's just saying that the extraterrestrial, the aliens, whoever that was contacted, that's the first signal that got to them. So I think that's interesting, is how radio, at least, is still, whatever radio play, the Orson Welles one is still being broadcast right now as we speak, somewhere out in the universe.
Well, yeah, like they in the plot of Contact, they actually touch on that, and it's like a point of contention where they're like, "Oh, should we sever communication with them?" But then it's like, "Oh, this could be a miscommunication. They're just trying to communicate, sending back something that we sent to them, proverbially." So it's kind of interesting how it's like, it's a little meta in that way, that it plays out the same in the storyline.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But yeah, so I think that there's a lot out there. I going back to just my list here, I have a couple others. There was also one that I found called Limetown. It's another fictional podcast. Okay. Yeah, it's about the disappearance of several hundred people from a Tennessee town and the fallout from like such a strange, bizarre event. There were moments where it's kind of like you might think what's happening, or that it's real, but it's completely made up. It is a totally fictional one. Like, it is not based on any kind of reality. But it's kind of like that Crichton telling, where it kind of like feels like it's playing out.
It uses that epistolary style, is that what's called, or like that almost like the found footage version.
Yeah.
In written form, you're using like documents to tell a story.
That's kind of like what I really like about the first season of K63 is the only time you hear anything narratively from what's going on is from the perspective of the tape recorder in the therapy sessions. And I was like, that's because like it has this very realistic lens from which you're viewing this.
Yeah. Well,
it almost feels like a record.
And two, we talk a lot about all the different art forms as much as we can. I mean, we haven't. I mean, I know we've mostly
barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, barely scratched the surface on it. But if you think about it, a lot of them come down to certain senses that you're going to use to paint that picture, be it in your mind or watch it in front of you with a movie or a TV show. And it's always a neat challenge to know, okay, if you're doing a radio play, the only sense really that you have with the connection with the audience is the ear, is your ability to hear. So you have to, when you're writing that and crafting your story, you have to remember, okay, how I have to rely solely on sound to communicate what's happening. I think that presents an interesting little challenge when you're trying to tell a story with it.
Yeah. It's like, I think that those limitations can be a virtue.
Yeah.
And you can see things a little bit differently, or maybe find a new way how to do something. It can be as much a benefit as it is a limitation.
No, yeah, you get that art from adversity, essentially.
Being forced to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know some of the times where I've learned the most, or when I've been the most constricted, like when I have more tools at my disposal, I maybe don't pick up quite as much because I wasn't forced to think of a different way.
No, yeah. Your focus is almost like pulled to the point where your creativity can sort of glaze over.
Yeah.
I love I think I've mentioned this before on one of the lectures I watched from the author Brandon Sanderson, the sci-fi fantasy author. He'll mention how a video game that he would play, I believe it was part of one of the Elder Scrolls games from way back when. If you try to do everything, a little bit of everything, and he's referring this to in terms of like world building for like a story, for a fantasy story, it can become counterproductive, or it can work against in the sense of like you'll create what is called like an ocean that's an inch deep. So it's vast, but the depth to it lacks. So essentially what he's getting at is pick a couple things and do them well and go deep into them, rather than trying to, if you're creating a world, I got to have a language, I got to have 50,000 cities with 10 million roads named, and I got to come up with the history of every road and the bakers and the brothels and the interworking politics and who's having sex with who died this week. It can become
Jar Jar. He's the key to all that.
If we get Jar Jar working, then we'll be good. It can become overwhelming, and when you're putting that to the audience, your reader, whoever, you're not going to be able to get all that across. So if you pick like one or two things and do that well, that will show, and it'll be all, your story will be all the more better for it. And I think that's going back to radio plays, having that limitation. You have to say, okay, I have one way I have one medium, if you will, to transfer this story to the audience. Now, how can I use that tool to make sure that people can paint a picture in their mind, or at least start to get that sense of whatever emotion that I as the author want them to have?
Yeah. I think too, like we were talking before, in terms of production on a radio play, and I mentioned that it's kind of has the atmosphere of being like a table read, but it's like, if you can record them remotely, I mean, obviously that's not always going to be an option, but it's like you could potentially bring people together on a project that necessarily wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to. So you can create very unique casts with people who live opposite ends of the country, opposite ends of the globe. And I think that opens up a lot of creative possibilities with these, where with a film, you unless you're Marvel, you have to physically get people in the same location.
Yeah.
They find creative ways to get around things. But yeah, I think the unconstrained nature of how a radio play can be produced, I think is something that I just want to kind of bring some awareness to, because I find them very interesting. The Cardinal Few that I've really gotten attached to, I love to see the way that they keep coming around every year, and maybe they're not quite as robust as a television show, but it's like there's still something to them.
No, absolutely.
And I think, like we've talked before, how video games are kind of like a unique medium that you don't want to cross compare it to maybe this will be a movie or a TV show. It's like, I don't like thinking about it that way anymore.
Yeah.
It's like I want to see something push this medium to being unique and bring something out that only can really exist in this form. And I think that this is one of the ones that kind of sits in one of those unique categories. Obviously, it's a little closer to television movies in terms of, how it unfolds. It is one of the two elements that make up TV and movies, is the audio end of the audio visual.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a uniqueness to the radio play that's going to come forward in coming years as more and more of them come out.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And you had mentioned like video games there too, and I will say I am definitely not an expert in this medium, in the radio play. I've never written one or attempted to write one, but even just talking about it now definitely gets that creative juice flowing a little bit.
Yeah.
It makes you want to, like, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe we could like see what happens, see what we can do. But yeah, you were talking with video games. One thing that just clicked in my mind, brought it about when you mentioned it. Did you ever play the Fallout games before?
I've never like sat through them. I have played a lot of parts of them, but I've never gone a straight run on them.
So one thing that I really love about it is in the game, you're in a post-apocalyptic world after like a nuclear war, and everyone's kind of like stuck in like the future is like a futuristic. It's like in the year 230 something, and then that's when the nuclear war happens. I can't remember exactly, but it's in like a futuristic 1950s style. It's as if like we progressed technologically beyond what the technology what we even have today, but culturally we sort of like got stuck in the 1950s essentially. I think that's the best way.
Yeah, it's like the future and the aesthetic of the 50s.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. But one of the things they have, it's called a Pip-Boy, and that's I just love how this can go, like playing back into the ludonarrative dissonance thing. But I like how like in that there's still what became one of the main ways of communication in this post-apocalyptic world is the radio.
Yeah.
Has like a resurgence, and one of the things you can do is listen to different radio stations on there, and they try to do like things in the style of the classic radio plays. And I found myself a lot of times when I'm just playing around in the game, going back to that meditative sort of effect, the quality that we talked about, found myself putting that on and listening to these radio plays, and it certainly enriched that whole experience. Here I am in this completely computer generated world, which has listening a ton of lore. Yeah, listening to the radio in that fake world, and it's almost like a weird Inception kind of thing happening there, which I thought was interesting.
I don't mean to poke fun, but it made me think of the episode of The Office where Dwight's building Second Life inside of Second Life.
I'm building Second Life inside of Second Life. Yep, that's true. I set myself up for that one.
Oh God, I love it. Well, it's too like looking back and like the historical element of it.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of the backbone of sound design.
Yeah.
I mean, these existed before like a lot of the big productions came around. Definitely, like radio plays existed before the advent of sound into film.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like they were kind of the first iteration of sound design. And like, I remember looking at like, there was like BTS stuff of like old timey radio plays being done. You could see like all like the doodads and the boobobs of them like hitting a bell or like springing like a copper coil and stuff. And just all these weird contraptions. Like,
is that how, I don't know the answer to this. Is that how like the Foley artist was essentially created?
I mean, it seems like a natural flow to me. I don't know for any ironclad like tracing that, but
well, for viewers who are not familiar, the Foley artist in film is essentially like you'll have a lot of like when you're doing the sound design for it, you'll have a lot of things that the sound needs to be added later. Like something as simple as a paper grocery bag. Usually on set, they'll use something that looks like a real grocery bag, but it's actually made out of like felt or like a fabric that to make sure that it gives off as little as noise as possible because they got to capture the actors' lines.
So they want it as clean as possible.
Yeah. And then the Foley artist, that's their job, will later then in a room in the studio will record the noises while usually watching the film. I don't know I'm assuming they still do it that way.
Mm-hmm. And the ways I've seen it done lately, that's typically out.
Yeah. And then record that noise and then add it in later on.
One of the big ones I know, like the Cardinal, just regular ones that I've seen done is just adding footsteps back in.
Mm-hmm. And now, of course, you can do that from a database now. You can like look up a noise, add that to it. But I do think that is another thing.
Well, also too, if you're putting on a production, I know like a lot of those things are consciously executed. Like the sound team will a lot of time will take like background or whatever other talent on set and just in the costuming of whatever actor they're recording it for the scene, and they'll just literally create like a sound library real quick when there's like downtime or like B crew on set. Like they'll grab stuff, make use of their time if there's offset time or day, what have you, whatever kind of thing. You know, I've worked more the indie end of things, but I've seen good use of time there for just like grabbing that kind of stuff. And then you have this well of stuff that in location that's going to perfectly match what you're doing. And that is, in my opinion, that's the ideal way to do it. Yeah, you can grab from a database, but I don't think it's a good sound designer can make anything. But I think having a good palette to build from of stuff that was on location, I think is definitely a better place to start than from scratch.
Mm-hmm. And you have to think a little bit differently of how you're going to execute this story. Because again, you only have the audio portion to do it. And it's interesting how like, I don't know how the script would necessarily look, but you can put some notes in there. I think of like one of my favorite descriptions, and I think if I'm remembering it correctly, is once again, something from Lord of the Rings. You know, the ring wraiths in that?
Yes, I've heard of them.
I'm familiar. Their iconic scream, that high pitch sort of thing they give in the movies. So it's that wail, that banshee like wail that they have. If I
who you calling a whale?
Hey, I'll say what I want to say. If I remember correctly, and I hope I'm getting this right, I believe Tolkien sort of describes it, the noise that they make, as almost how when leaves are rustling, when a wind picks up leaves, dead leaves in like the fall and the autumn, and scrapes them against like a mountainside, or like a rock. Like that's the way.
Since you bring that up, that's actually I completely forgotten about this until just now. Sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah, you're good.
Another great piece of sound design from that was the sound of the Balrog.
Yeah,
they literally just took a cinder block, dragged it.
And that is huge, because that's, I think, if you're doing a radio play, like you have to almost like you can create noises like that with just some of the simplest objects, especially today with the ability to tweak them and change them in the computer.
To do that level of world building is certainly something you can do, but it all, like in the K63 show that we've been discussing, I mean, a lot of that is just like the courtyard outside of the institution, or just the banter of like the other inmates of the institution. It's like, it's a very, in terms of locations, it's very simple for the sound design, but it's an incredibly effective and engaging story that didn't take much to produce, honestly, other than the two actors that are principally involved.
Yeah, and it almost has a weird way, kind of, if you're painting or doing like Photoshop or something, you work in layers.
Yeah.
And I would imagine it would be similar doing a radio play, because you have to then think of like, okay, you take like a courthouse outside or in the woods, wherever you are. You got to think, okay, what's going on in the background? What can you hear? Are we outside? Are we inside? If we're in an office, what kind of office is it? Is it an accounting office? Is this the stock market? Is this a video game development office? Is this a medical insurance office or something? So what would be the background noise? And then you keep moving forward in the layers. Do you have other people talking? Who are the main characters? I guess there would also be to the aspect of diegetic and non-diegetic sound like you have in film.
Yeah.
Right?
No, totally.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to do it. Do you want to describe to our viewers to inform in case anyone is unaware?
So it's kind of like a separating layer of like interpretation from the audience, I would call it. So like diegetic sounds are sounds that appear in the world of the film and can be heard by the characters within it. And then non-diegetic would be like either soundtrack or music most often.
Yeah.
That are meant strictly for the audience to hear.
Yeah.
And are not necessarily occurring in that world. So there's like, it's almost like that division of the fourth wall for the cast and the actors within the world of the medium, and then everything beyond that is strictly for the audience's artistic. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
No. Have some confidence here. No, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. It's essentially just whatever emanates from the world of the story or what doesn't.
Yeah.
And so like if you have a radio in the shot and something's coming out of the radio in the movie, that is considered diegetic. So I would imagine in the radio play, the narrative podcast, you can work with that a little bit as well, in that if you want to have a narrator character who's reading something, is like, oh, Sarah came to the park today and met with John, and then you go into the scene. Obviously that's a horrible line, but I don't have the ability, I don't have the skills to be a narrator. But that's something that can be done and used to your benefit when making a radio play, I feel.
Yeah. And I'll say, I think that it's a lot of bigger name actors are coming and showing up in a lot of these, but I think it's a good palette for a lot of voice actors to come in. And I know that Marvel Wastelanders has a few that have come through those casts. Some of the other shows that I've caught have just strictly voice actors that have come through, but there's you look at something like Critical Role, which is it's just like a live streamed D&D club, basically is what it is. But the players that consistently come through are like mostly voice actors, and what's cool about that is you're kind of getting this like extra breath of life into the characters that are built from these voice actors who really know what they're doing in that arena. So it just has this extra layer of depth that kind of draws you in. That's why I think they've been very successful with that, because really lends itself to the D&D storytelling. They really like do a good job of fleshing out their characters and making them feel real.
Yeah, I would agree in that. And that's one thing that lends itself very well to radio play is D&D.
Yeah.
Just the essence of it. If you've never played it, shame on you. Because
not shame on you.
Not shame on you.
I know I didn't get a lot of opportunities through college because I actually didn't find a lot of people that were into it until like late in the game, and then they already had their groups set up.
I think too it's that it's really not. I've never played it as like I've never been a stickler for the rules of it, because I always just looked at it as it's literally a writing exercise. That's essentially what it is. So if you enjoy creativity in writing, I highly recommend it. If you don't, that's okay too. If you're not a fan of it, no problem.
One of my favorite things to do with D&D campaigns is to take pre-existing campaigns or ones that other people have written and adapting them to fit the parameters of other like famous existing storylines. So like, say like a Terminator 2 campaign or like a The Thing campaign, like stuff like that. I think that adds another depth of intrigue to it.
No, it definitely sparks, I think, the creative mind, and it's meant to just be fun. And then that's going back to when we said you're limited with the limitation or that art from adversity with a radio play. You look at something like that, and if it were made, if that never existed and were made today, it would surely be a video game in some form. But I believe that came out in the late 70s or something when it was first developed at D&D. And all they could do at the time was say, well, we're going to have to just use pen and paper. We're just going to have to use your mind, and like you're going to have to just use your imagination as the main tool here. So I'm just to say, like, if you're doing a radio play, yes, you don't have many of the fancy things that you see in, say, like, that would be used in a Disney movie or Warner Brothers production or whatever, or something with Amazon, but that's okay. You can still make something incredible out of it by just using.
Oh, absolutely.
But just using the skills to listen.
As long as you have a good story, I think you definitely got the bones to make something worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And sound design and other elements will come as you push forward. And it's not to. I hope that I'm not putting down sound design in any way by saying it's a more attainable medium. I just think that it doesn't come, as we said, it doesn't come with all like the constraints of having to find locations, of having to scout things out, having to get the visual end of all the gear. Yes, you still have to get microphones. You have to acquire whatever you would cobble together to build the sound design of the world. That obviously goes with a lot of gear as well, depending on how deep you want to dive.
Yeah.
But I do find it to be a more in-house, more collaborative atmosphere than film can get to be as it's more expanded. So I think it's an interesting middle ground medium that I think a lot of people have overlooked. Not everybody, but I think it would benefit from a light being shined on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's not to say it doesn't have its own challenges and you got to work at it and master the craft like anything else. I just think it doesn't have, like you said, as many unnecessary constraints, if that makes sense, to putting it out there and getting it made. If you want to make the next Marvel movie, good luck.
Yeah.
But you're going to need a lot of money and you're going to need a lot of extra help. If you want to make your own radio play, there's not much stopping you. It is a much more attainable, but that's not to say that it doesn't still take mastery.
It's going to take some work.
Yeah.
Not even just mastery, but just work. You're going to have to put in the hours for sure, but it's something that you can do. When we were researching getting started, I had a lot that I had to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't fully up to the challenge and ready as I thought I was, but you take the ball and you run with it, and every step is another thing learned and another step towards your end goal there.
I was basically just going to say something I've said again, but
in
a different way.
You go back to the beginning,
and then you go back to
sort of non-linear.
Just tell us what happened, man. Oh, it's Nikes. I hate. Does this happen to you more often now?
Dude, every single episode I do that.
I'm just like, God damn it. The hell was I talking about?
I feel like my brain is just deteriorated out of my ass at this point.
I don't know. It's gone. I lost it.
All right, you get it back. You get it back about an hour after we wrap.
Yep, probably. Well, we were talking about the being able to make a radio play and it not being not as difficult. That's not the word. Oh man, this is bugging the hell out of me. All right. Well, I'll have to let it go for now.
Yeah. We did braze on it, but I do want to talk, since we brought it up, a little bit about the War of the Worlds, because I do think that was such an interesting situation. It was well after the birth of the radio play at the turn of the previous century.
Yeah.
But Orson Welles, near the more start of his career, he was doing a series of radio advertisements more so than the play itself, but it was passing itself off as a real broadcast. It was kind of like the Cloverfield found footage movie, but not advertised as a movie. It was just kind of put on the air as what seemed to be a real broadcast. So when those came on the air, a lot of people heard it and thought that the world was being invaded by Martians, and the content of the advertisements were really happening. So a lot of people thought that it started a lot of small pocket bits of panic of people thinking that the world really was ending and
that Martians had invaded. Yeah.
For all the good intent, there was some interesting problems caused by those broadcasts. And I know Wells had several lawsuits that he had to deal with through that. It was very messy and complicated. He did get the word out about the movie for sure.
Yeah. And do you remember the show Hey Arnold back in the day?
I loved Hey Arnold.
There was
I'm actually wearing a Nickelodeon t-shirt right now.
Oh, of what? Just the Nickelodeon thing, or?
Yeah, it's got like all the old school 90s cartoon.
They did an episode, a Halloween special, where they sort of paid homage to the whole War of the Worlds broadcast. Essentially, Gerald and Arnold are trying to play a prank on everyone in the boarding house, and they do like a fake broadcast and have everything set up for this alien invasion, but somehow they end up broadcasting it to the entire city, and the whole city goes into panic thinking that there's real aliens invading. That's something I think worth digging up too, if you want just a little tidbit there.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know it was similar to like the ease of it. It was just like another little detail I was going to point out, but it's escaped me now. I've got presque-vu.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
Just tell your doctor next time you go in.
And they have pills for it now.
they'll get it taken care of.
Yeah, okay.
I think the radio play is just an interesting medium. I think it's something that if you're willing to look up a few of these, it's something that could be worth your time to check out. I know that there's some stories out there that could benefit from the more ease of production that these can offer. So something to consider if you have a script or something that you're kicking around.
It's definitely one of those ones that, like, at first it might not look as appealing, or as it might not have the sex appeal, the sexiness of the blockbuster film or the next $300 million making bestseller. But it is definitely something that you're right, deserves more time in the limelight.
Yeah, and I think that there's already a wealth of stuff out there to check out, look into, and see if there's something that might catch your interest. You know, it might, at the very least, might even be something that you can find to just kill some time or help you multitask your daily activities, because that's certainly what I picked them up for.
I love how you're recounting the story as if I was not involved directly. As I was like, Brian, I was there.